Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Advanced Voice Design, Conversation, and Memory. My name is Martha. I work on the Alexa team, and I will be your moderator today. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share the recording with you afterward. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you are having any technical issues, you can use the chat section on your control panel to talk to our tech support. And if you have questions, you can submit yours by typing them into the questions panel on the control panel, and we will try to get to them as time allows. When you leave the webinar, you will be asked to fill out a survey. It should take you no more than 30 seconds and will help us deliver more of the content you find most useful. So please send us your feedback, and thank you in advance. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded and will later be posted on our site. We will also email it to you and share on our social channels. If you don't follow us on social, please take a moment to do so. On Twitter and Facebook, you can find us at Alexa Devs. On LinkedIn, look for our page, Amazon Alexa Developers. Before I introduce our presenters, I would like to kick off with one poll question. You should see the question on your screen now. How many Alexa skills have you built? Your choices are 0, 1, 2, and more than 2. Your answers are coming in. Thank you so much. And we see that most of you have built one Alexa skill. Great. Thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce our hosts, Alexa Solutions Architects, Memo Doring and Justin Jeffress. Memo and Justin, take it away.
All right. All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. So yes, my name is Justin Jeffress, and this is.
Yeah, I'm Memo Doring. We're both solutions architects on the voice education team. And what we do is we talk to developers all day about how to build voice experiences. And today we're going to be talking about advanced voice design.
Okay. So before we get into what we're going to talk about today, we're just going to go over some new things that have come out. So. We have Alexa for Business.
Yeah. So there are 3 really big, exciting things that we wanted to just highlight really quickly before we get into the meat of the presentation. The first one is Alexa for Business. And what Alexa for Business is a new tool from AWS that allows you to deploy both devices and Alexa skills at scale. So Alexa for Business, you might think that only applies to an enterprise, but if you have a hotel or a retirement home or a gated community and you just want to share a skill that is pertain to that small group of people and not publicly broadly, Alexa for Business really lets you do that.
Yeah, so then another thing we've announced is monetization. So now you can make transactions in your skills through Amazon Pay, and you can make one-time payments and also subscriptions. And then
and then the third thing we want to talk to is a new global program that we announced, and what it means is devices are available to ship to 80 plus countries, which is really exciting. What it doesn't mean is that every language in those 80 countries is going to be supported. It's the same languages that we support or we've announced support for, but if you want to use a device in English and you happen to live in Mexico like my parents, they can now purchase devices locally and just get them there, and I don't have to smuggle devices for Christmas for them.
Okay. And then we also want to announce the new testing simulator. This is really awesome.
So we have a brand new simulator that is out in beta as of yesterday. So this is super, super new. And what it allows you to do is test some of the more advanced functionality through yesterday and today. So if you're one of the lucky few, you might get it a little bit earlier than that. I'm not sure about that. That was just a rumor.
Yeah, I missed the boat on the pre-order, so I'm not going to get mine.
You're fired.
All right. So over time, user interfaces have changed, and so with each new user interface, a bunch of new challenges have been presented, and there's a little bit of overlap into that takes developers to figure out how to build effectively for those new changes. So for example, with mobile, the tried and true methods of right-click menus and hover menus didn't work, because now with touch, you're directly touching and manipulating the user interface directly. So there is no hover, there is no right-click. And so it took developers time to figure out how to best build an experience based around touch. And so for voice user interfaces, we're at that point now where we're just starting to figure things out and just trying to figure out how to build a compelling experience for voice.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway here is there's been multiple iterations of what a user interface is, right? And as people that, like most of you, like the survey said, have already built a skill. So you're familiar with the concepts of Alexa skill building, but it's still day one, right? Like in a very Amazon fashion, we might say that. But if you think about when like mobile devices really started to go broad, we still didn't really understand all the nuances of building for mobile. We were still like, I used to work for BlackBerry in the day, and like back then it was a pain, and we were still trying to kind of shoehorn stuff into small devices that was like a desktop experience. And we would never do that today, but we didn't know that at the minute that the devices became popular. It took years of that. So it's been a couple of years since the Echo's been out, but we still think it's a great time to be building skills, and it's a great time to be picking up these skills, this knowledge, because it's going to carry you through your career in the future.
Right. And one of the challenges for designing for voice is that there is no like screen, and how do you discover? So one of the things that's an advantage for designing for voice is that it's conversational. You can now speak with your technology, and conversation is a very natural way how to communicate with things. It's something that we've been doing since the time we were born. And so we're able to now interact with our technology through our voice. So now we want to go through a high level overview of the what happens when a skill is invoked. And we understand that many of you have built skills before, so
yeah. And again, this is just like a quick refresher in case you built a skill, but it's been a few months, or you just want to touch on the core concepts really quickly. The first one is, we don't ask you as a developer to work with voice, with the actual audio, with the actual speech. Right. What we're asking you to do is build a UI, provide training data for that UI, and then we use all these cloud services to take that and turn it into a JSON object. Right. And then as a developer, it's fairly easy to work with JSON. It's a standard, right? Like the language of the internet. In many cases, you can actually program in whatever language you want, as long as you can transact in JSON. So it makes it very, very flexible. We also wanted to quickly highlight something that is obvious from the spot over here in the middle of us is multimodal experiences. So you have to consider those visual elements. And for a lot of the devices, the visual elements are just going to be cards. And those are optional. The user might or might not see them. But with a device that has a screen like the Spot or the Show, the user most likely will see them. So we have a little bit more functionality there for you as a designer, as a developer. What we don't want you to do there is to be forcing the user to interact with the screen. So say this and then tap that and then say this other thing and then swipe. You don't want to do that. What you want to do is have a voice first experience that is propped up or enhanced or made better by having a visual cue. But the user might be across the room. They might not even see it. They might not want to touch the screen because they have their hands dirty. So the compelling use cases for voice don't go away just because you happen to have a screen on it. Right. So you want to make sure that you're designing for voice first and then enhance the experience with a visual aid. And you want to make sure that if your user interface like with voice is terrible, no one's going to see your wonderful, beautiful multimodal displays because no one's going to want to interact with your skill. Yeah, and I think Justin, the other day you gave a good example, and that's how we ended up with that tuxedo on there. Is it doesn't make sense to describe the lapel or the cut of a certain piece. Right. You don't need to say, oh, it's cut at a 45-degree angle. Like it's hard to visualize unless you're an expert in tuxedos, and most users won't be. So just showing them a picture is a great experience. Or like, here's a cool dog sniffing some cheese and some wine. He's a classy dog. So there's three concepts we want to really cover today. One is dialogue management, which is being really mindful about having a conversation. The second one is synonyms or entity resolution, and how do we cover multiple ways a user can say something and have predictable behavior or good behavior. The last one is persistence, and you can also think of persistence as memory. So that's why the title of the presentation is Context and Memory. Using both dialogue management and synonyms, we kind of get a context, and then using synonyms and persistence, we can use memory. So it's a pretty good set of tools that you can combine and build a lot of different things with it. What we're going to be talking about specifically, because these are more advanced topics, we didn't want to start from like, oh, let's build a skill, and then we're going to just start with something that's built, and we're going to do more of a deep dive or dissect it. But we want you to be able to look at the whole code, right? Like I'm the type of person that if someone gives me something that's half built and they're like, oh, you just change this and it'll work, it'll do exactly what you want, I'm going to end up tearing it all apart, probably throwing away all their code, and then just porting up just line by line what I want exactly, so I can understand. And when I'm debugging, I'm not like, who wrote this? Because even when I write my own code, because I'm very bad at commenting, I'll be like, oh, what drunkard like wrote this? And I'm like, oh, it was me a week ago. Go memo. So it's we want you to be able to look at the guts of this. But if you want to take a quick overview of what we're doing, it's it's a skill called Pet Match, and it's available on our GitHub repo today with a whole tutorial around it. Justin built 99.9% of this.
Collaborated with Memo.
And if you just want to see a little diagram of the architecture, it looks like what's on the screen. You have a skill, and then that skill is talking or is running a Lambda endpoint. That Lambda endpoint is making calls to an API that we built on API gateway. And that is really just exposing a DynamoDB database and returning a result. But you could swap out that DynamoDB for something else, or using the same bones of this, you can make calls to whatever API you want, right? And the sky's the limit with this. It's more of a it's not something you would just take and publish for yourself. It's more of, here's a bunch of good design practices that we included, and we kind of threw a bunch of different technologies together to make a compelling skill that will allow you to take those, and then once you've played around with them a little bit, integrate them in whatever skill you're building.
Right, and we've also supplied the Swagger file for the API gateway, so you can replicate that if you like. So yeah, let's talk about context for dialogue management.
And in general, context means remembering what was just said about, right? Like I think the classic example in speech is talking about the Oscars. Right. So I can ask you, like if we were actually having a conversation as humans, I could say, oh, has a Star Wars film ever won an Oscar? And then the answer could be yes or no. And then my follow-up question could be like, what about Mark Hamill? And that second question didn't include the word Oscar, or win, or Star Wars, or actor. But you know, based in the context that what I'm trying to get at is, has Mark Hamill won an Oscar, right? And obviously, this is going to be full of spoilers. I went to watch the movie yesterday. No one else here is watching.
I haven't seen it yet. You can't talk about it.
I want to lord this information over them. If you don't want spoilers, send money.
How many Bitcoin do you need?
Send Bitcoin. We take cryptocurrency. That's a joke. But in general, what you want to do is maintain that context somehow. Right. So if you were having that conversation about the Oscars with your device, you don't want it when you ask that second question to say like, I don't know what you're talking about, or Mark Hamill was born in blah 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 in blah blah blah, right? Right. You want it to continue talking about the Oscars. So that's a little bit of what we're going to cover. If you want to test that out on a device today, an easy way to do it is like say, ask it for a mathematical problem. Say like, whatever, I don't know, what's 16,317 divided by 8.5, and then it'll give you a number. It'll end the session, but then if you say, Alexa, what's that multiplied by 10? It'll grab the original value and just give it to you multiplied by 10, right? So it maintained the context for that. And that's at system level, so let's look at how you can do it at your skill level.
Yes, and so starting off, like, just this is also sort of a high level like review of like interacting with the skill. And so with pet match, we can say, Alexa, open pet match to open. Shall we demo the skill?
Yeah.
Okay. So Alexa, open pet match.
Welcome to Pet Match. I can help you find the best dog for you. What are 2 things you are looking for in a dog?
I want a guard dog that's high energy.
What size of a dog would you like?
Tiny.
So a tiny guard high energy dog sounds good for you. Consider a Chihuahua.
So that's basically the gist of the skill. What it's doing is it's asking you for a set of features or values or whatever, collecting them, and then giving you a response that's based on that. But we don't want it to be like a single way to invoke it, right? So there's a few more examples.
Right. So we can say, find me a dog. We could say, we could also say, ask for a dog from pet match, right? So you're not stuck in saying, because with language, there's many ways to say the same thing, and there's many ways to like phrase something. And so the automatic speech recognition, natural language understanding, machine learning engines will figure out what it is that you're trying to say and invoke the skill.
Yeah, and again, a bunch of you, the people that are joining us today, have built skills, but we don't know how long ago that was.
Mm-hmm.
If you're very, very old school, before you had to have this pattern where you would say the wake word, then the carrier phrase, which was like open, launch, start, and then your invocation name, and then you could have an utterance. And that was like a couple of years ago. Now, a lot of work's gone into being able to just put that invocation name wherever you want. So you can say, Alexa, ask Lyft to get me a ride, or Alexa, or Alexa, get me a ride from Lyft, or Alexa, I want to get a ride from Lyft, please. So you're just moving the word Lyft around in that sentence, but you're saying the same thing. And that's really the real magic of voice, right? It's very different than a graphical UI in the sense that you don't want that, with a graphical UI, you don't want something to vary wildly, right? Every time you refreshed a web page, everything moved around. Like now the title's on the bottom and the bottom's the buttons are up top. It'd be very annoying.
Right.
But because we want that reference visually, and like that's how we are understanding that object. As a voice experience, you want a little bit of variance. You want to account for that because that's how we speak. Right. So if I'm saying good morning, I might say different things every morning, just whatever is like in my frame of mind, right?
Right.
I wasn't planning to talk about Star Wars today, but randomly I did because I was up till 1 a.m. Watching the movie. And insert spoiler warning. So that's the last time.
Yes.
Last time I'm doing that. So what we wanted to cover is like, okay, you're an advanced skill builder. You understand the concepts of utterances, intents, and slots, but how do they actually pertain to what we're building today, right?
Right. So our utterances are our user interface, right? That's how we interact with the skill. And then behind that utterance, there is an intent. There's something that we're trying to have happen, right? So in the case of pet match, we have these 4 intents. We have the pet match intent, the cancel intent, help intent, and stop intent. And so in order to invoke a pet match, we can say, find me a pet or find me a dog, and the pet match intent will fire. And then likewise, if we had like said help, the help intent would trigger, and we would offer help to the user. And so we've talked about utterances and intents. And so what are slots? Well, truth is we've actually been looking at them. And so the slots are actually the variables that our intent needs in order to perform the task for the user. And so if you think about it, like slots are built into the language, right? So when we're speaking, we have the sentence with the slotted data in that comes in. And if we just change these slot values, the meaning of the sentence can change, but the overall structure remains the same.
Yeah, and if you just look at this, what's on screen right now, and you don't look at the slots at all, and you say, I want that energy for my, you could, even if you abstracted even the word energy out of there, all you're saying is like, I feel like I wish to acquire something with a bunch of characteristics. So you could switch that out to be, a pet, a car, a house, a beverage, anything, right? And this is the concept here is really a carrier phrase. What are the phrases that you're using to actually get those values from your users? Because you want the hard work about from building a voice UI is really understanding how your users speak and what are the sentences they're going to say to convey them values that you want. Because it's not like building a web page where you can say, I want the color of the car, and they have a drop down, and these are the only values, and then they're going to hit next on a button, and then I know I've got that value, and then they're going to say this other thing, and then they're going to say this other thing. They can say the thing in any order that they want, and use any word to describe them, and they can even say something that's out of bounds. So we could be trying to collect a beverage value, and someone could say like screen, and how are you going to handle that? Are you just going to error out, or is your skill just going to say like error, boom, kick you out of the experience, or are you going to handle that gracefully? And that's something we're also going to talk about a little bit later.
Yes. And so as far as our skill is concerned, it really only needs these 4 values, right? Because these are the variables that it needs in order to perform the task. But from a linguistics perspective, we need these extra words, which we refer to as the carrier phrase or the anchor words. And so you need to be thinking about, when you design your user interface, how these things sort of relate to one another, the carrier phrase and the slots, and how people are going to speak them.
And if you think about the slot values, even like with the curly braces in there, it's the very JSON-y, right? Like it's the slot values are what we're going to end up passing in a sense to our API. And APIs are very good, and most APIs today are very focused on communication between 2 computers. But you definitely need that voice UI in front of it to give it that conversational approach, to actually move it to a conversation between humans, and not to just devices.
Right. And so Memo sort of touched upon this earlier, but when you're interacting with the skill and you need to give all the information to the user, there's a possibility that they might not give you all that information. So if they give you all the information that your skill needs, if we got all of the slots that we need for pet match, we call that a one-shot invocation. But it can be very difficult with voice to give that all in one breath, especially if there's so many more things that you have to capture. Like say, for example, you're booking a flight and you need to get the destination, the origin, the date that they're leaving, when they're coming back, their seat preference, their meal preference, all of these different things. Like
your frequent flyer number, and like all these different things. So one-shot invocations are great, but they're hard on the user. And there's 2 concepts here. One is the cognitive load. So the user has to have the sentence mapped out in their head perfectly before they even say it, which is typically not how you speak. Like you start talking and then, or at least how I speak, I start talking and then I start adding things as I'm going, as the thoughts come into my head. And the second one is just one breath. So the device, as soon as it hears a pause in your speech, it's going to assume you're done speaking. And it's going to try to parse out that knowledge. So if you're making your user say a bunch of different values at a rapid fire pace, most likely you're going to have accuracy issues, because they're either going to be stumbling all over themselves, or just going like, I want a red Mustang that's 1968, and then like even you're making it harder on the speech recognition engine, because words might get mushed together.
Right. And then if you force your user to give you all the information at once, they're probably not going to enjoy using your skill. They're probably just going to give up and go away, and that's not what you want.
Yeah, and a part about actually building advanced skills is considering that engagement, considering that user experience. Obviously, at Amazon, we care a lot about our customers, but we believe that you as skill builders, as skill designers, as programmers, should care a lot about that customer experience as well. And a good way to maintain that is to give your user a lot of flexibility. It makes it harder on you, but that's kind of the name of the game at this point.
Right. And so to solve this situation where we haven't gotten all the information that we need from the user in one shot, we can use conversation. And so we can take multiple turns. And so, if I was going to book a flight and I called my flight agency, they would, ask me a question and then follow up with a follow-up question. And in that process, if they say, where would you like to go? And I said, if I were to say, I would like to go to Tokyo next week, well, then I've already given them when I'm leaving, in addition to where I'm going. And so even though I wasn't asked when, I said when. And so as far as like context goes, the travel agent at that point should remember that when I'm leaving.
Yeah, and there's like what a concept that goes hand in hand with what we've been talking about is overfilling, right? So if you get a question asked, then the user might say more or something else or two concepts in there, and so you have to take that into account when you're building your utterances, right? Like the user gave me size and energy, for pet match, right? Or they gave me energy and disposition, or all these different values but there's multiple permutations and combinations of how they could have given them to you. There's interesting guidelines around how you collect that. So one is my theory of people that work collecting data from other people on the phone, specifically like travel agents, is if you call the same travel agent multiple times to book the same flight, you would get a different path. Like not every day, but there'd be different paths you'd navigate, just depending on the mood you're in, the mood they're in, what time of the day it is, how busy they are, what flight they just booked, what experience they just had. So it's not going to be exactly the same. Like it's not just a tree the person's navigating. Obviously, there's different experiences, but you probably had an experience when you called a customer support rep and they just obviously had a script in front of them and they were going down that tree. And you're like, I already did 8 of the 9 things you're going to ask me to. Can we just get to that 9th thing that I haven't tried? And they're like, have you rebooted your computer? And you're like, come on, let's move quick. But they have a script and it's got a ton of friction. And you have a human on the other side, but they're being forced into this funnel or this really tight structure. And that's what's adding all this friction. And you don't want to do that with voice.
Right. And so one of the challenges for designing around this is there's a lot of logic that you have to provide to keep track of what's required, what's not required. And then if you get an overfilled situation, how do you handle that? How do you mark off? And so it can be a little bit tricky to build all of this your code yourself. But luckily built into the Alexa SDK, the Alexa Skills Kit, is dialog delegation. So what you can do here is you can mark in your user interaction model which slots are required, and then delegate the collection of the slots to Alexa. And so at that point, you can leverage Alexa to do that for you.
Yeah,
and
in essence, you're moving all that complexity from like, is this slot filled? I need this slot. All that into the cloud, right? Into Alexa's brain, instead of having to do it yourself by hand. And it makes it a lot quicker too, right?
Right.
Because you're not looking at an object, having to send it all back and forth. It's all being handled at the Alexa skill or the Alexa voice service, level. So everything's kind of going back and forth. But I like a concept I heard you mention the other day, Justin, which was you as a developer, you don't lose control.
Right.
You still have the same level of granular control.
Right, because you can plug into the different events and you can check and see like, oh, okay, this value that they gave me is invalid. So you can reprompt them for that value.
Yeah.
And we'll go over that later in the presentation today. So, and if you use the dialog management to elicit your slots, everyone's happy because the user didn't have to do mental gymnastics in order to like say everything in one breath, give you the one-shot invocation. And then you're happy because you're able to get all the data that you need to perform the task for the user.
And you did it in a fashion where you didn't have to write a bunch of code just to handle all these corner cases and different experiences. You can just say, okay, Alexa, just make sure this slot is filled, confirm with the user, right? Like if I'm booking a flight, I want to explicitly confirm. I'm going from Seattle to Tokyo on Tuesday, flying Delta with an aisle seat at blah, 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 arriving blah, 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 coming back on this date, and it's going to cost X, Y, Z, and we're going to charge your American Express on file. And once like I heard all that at a nice pause clip, I can say, cool, and then make that charge. But I don't want to confirm every step.
Right.
Like, I want an aisle seat. I heard you want an aisle seat. Is that correct? And then it's like, why am I doing this?
Right. So you need to be careful, like thinking about, if you go overboard with confirmations, you can just make your user exasperated and they won't want to use your skill.
Yeah, and there's certain tricks you can use to avoid that. One is implicit confirmation, right? So instead of asking the user, oh, I heard you want an aisle seat. Is that okay? Well, you could just say, okay, it's an aisle seat, or I heard you want to go to Tokyo. Let's look for good dates. If the user doesn't want to go to Tokyo, they're going to say, no, I want to go to Denver. And they'll correct for you. They're doing the error handling. So you're offloading a bunch of these pieces to either Alexa or the user, but it's still a conversation. Like, it still feels natural.
Right. And to that point, if the user says, like, if in the skill, it misinterprets that they said, I want a window seat, but it actually wanted an aisle seat. The user could say, oh, no, I want the window seat, even if Alexa had asked, where do you want to go next?
Yeah.
So you don't have to answer the question that was asked of you.
Yeah, you would just get a no intent, and then, oh, you don't want that? What do you actually want? And then you're gonna kind of handle that. But it's a lot better to do that than say, like, now you've got an aisle seat, brother. This is how it's gonna go.
Right. I made that's the choice for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So next we want to talk about synonyms, which the way how we resolve synonyms is through what we call entity resolution. And entity resolution is how to map one or more synonyms to a slot value. So in conversation, in language, there's many ways to say the same thing. And so in pet match, we have the size slot, and we have like 4 different possible values, tiny, small, medium, and large. But what happens if the user says little? Well, we can actually map little to one of our values, or actually we can map it to multiple values. So you can see here we have little mapped to both tiny and small.
Yeah, and I think you covered a couple concepts there. The first one is synonyms, right? So let's just think about that from like a sports team perspective. You could say the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cavs, all those map to a single value that you want to use. And let's say you're calling an API, so you actually want those to map to like a number. It's the ID for that team. But you don't want the user to have to say F1_17.
Right.
You want
Makes
them to
no
just
sense.
say something really conversational. So that's one way to use entity resolution. What did the user say, and then normalize that in a sense, so then you can use it somewhere else. You're storing it in a database, or you're using it as a hash for your DynamoDB, or you're making a call to an API with it.
Right.
The second way to do it is what you're using here. Is there's a bit of ambiguity between what the user say and the actual value. So we have these arbitrary cutoffs, which are tiny, small, medium, large. So in our mind, little was either tiny or small, and we didn't want to make that just good call.
Right. We didn't want to just force it upon the user.
Yeah. So we mapped it to both, and now we'll look at how the code looks, or the actual JSON objects look. But what we're doing is, if we get that value, if the user said little, we're going to have them disambiguate for us. Like, that could be tiny, or that could be small. What were you thinking? Blah, blah, blah. Or you could even phrase it differently. Let's say you have other values, which are how much a dog weighs. And, is 10 pounds good? And the user will be like, no, you want something smaller. And then you're like, they mean actually tiny. So that's how you can play around with that.
It's fun because you can ask the user for their opinion.
Yes.
And then another thing I want to call out is if you look at the medium slot value, we have medium size. And so what that means is we're not limited to just single word for a synonym. We can actually build more complicated synonyms, and that allows us to do some really cool things.
Yeah, so going kind of back to the sports concept, you can have Los Angeles Dodgers, right?
Greatest team ever.
Isn't the greatest team ever the current champion?
No.
That's not how it works. So it's a team that won like in 86.
88.
88, all right, cool. I'm just clarifying. If you want to see this in action, we'll kind of drop a few skills, just quick shout outs as we go. One's from, since we were talking baseball, you can go check Jeff Blankenberg's, who's another evangelist on our team.
Yes.
Great guy, except he shaved his beard. He has a skill called Games Back, and it'll tell you how, the season's obviously over. But during the season, it could tell you how many games back your team was. But you could say things like Seattle Mariners, or the Mariners, or the M's, or the Seattle M's, right? And those are multi-word or single word, and they would all work perfectly fine.
Right.
And here, Justin, on this slide, has a bunch more examples that actually showcase that.
Right.
So high energy, play fetch, go hiking. All those are multi-words, but they're more around a concept, because what we're trying to get at here is the level of energy of the dog.
Right. It might be natural to say I want a high energy dog, but no one really says I want a medium energy dog. What does that even mean? So to make the interaction more natural, we can map these things that mean medium energy that people would more likely to say to the medium value. Ultimately, we're going to pass medium to our API, but again, we don't want to force our user to speak as if they're speaking to an API. So let's talk about what happens when we do get a match. So we have our JSON.
Yeah, so we have a little JSON object here, and we're kind of referencing it's just a little snippet of a larger JSON object.
Yes, the whole thing.
But what we're referencing here is the size slot, right? Mm-hmm. So we got a slot object in there as part of the JSON object, and there would be a slot array with every slot that we had at that point in the conversation. And we have the slot, and the slot itself has an object in there that's called size, and that's the name of the slot that we're actually working with at that point. You see that it's got a value. The value is huge.
Yep.
That's what the user said, right?
Yep.
And then there's other two highlighted values there, which are ER success match.
That's not an oxymoron.
Exactly. So what it does is, what it means is entity resolution success match. Entity resolution, that piece of the logic, found a match that was successful. So it heard a word from the user. There was actually a word, and there was a match for that in the logic that we built, excuse me.
Yes.
So the value from huge maps to large, but we didn't lose what the user said. So when we confirm this, explicitly, implicitly, however we're doing it, we could say, here's your large dog. I mean, here's your huge dog.
Right.
Because that's what the user said. So Justin and I were talking about this yesterday, and one of the things is, if I was saying, I want to go get a coffee, and then the API returned a place that sells coffee locations, but the confirmation was like, here's the restaurant you were looking for. I was like, no, I was looking for a coffee shop, not a restaurant.
Right.
Even though the value that we're using is like restaurant plus coffee somehow in the API call.
Yeah, because there's kind of an unwritten rule that in conversation you use the same word that somebody spoke to you with.
Yeah,
so
there's a concept of when you're asking a question, the response has to have a certain format. And this applies to English, and it'll be a little bit different if you're thinking in a different language. But in English, if I say, what are we doing tomorrow, Justin? You would say, your natural response would be, tomorrow we're going to go see Star Wars. I said I'd stop. But your response is going to have that implicit confirmation at the top. Tomorrow we're going to go see Star Wars. So we both know we're talking about tomorrow, the activity that we're going to do tomorrow.
Right. If I were to say, today I'm going to go see Star Wars, you're going to be like, wait, I asked about tomorrow.
Yeah. Or if you said, I'm going to go see Star Wars tomorrow, then you're answering, it sounds weird, right? Because even though it's the same piece of information or the same data structure, it's flipped around,
right?
And it just sounds odd. So you want to keep those things in mind, but also at the level of, if I said, what are we going to do tomorrow? And you said, Saturday, November 16, 2017, we will go to the movies. Then, again, you're breaking it. I said tomorrow, I want to hear something that's similar to that, right?
Right.
You could say Saturday, and that would still work. But then you just have to be mindful of how you're confirming that, even though it's an implicit confirmation.
Right. And so another good thing about entity resolution is that it eases up programming. There's less work that you have to do because you're leveraging the Alexa cloud to do all that work for you. You're providing that training data that dictates how these synonyms are going to be mapped out. So you don't have to have lists and lists in your code of different synonyms that could possibly be values that map to your slot values.
Yeah, and I know back in the day, and a bunch of people that were built some of the first skills or the first really skills that got a lot of traction were doing fuzzy matching on the back end. So they were you end up building almost your own NLU, but it's hard and it doesn't work that great. And entity resolution really allows you to not have to do that in your code. Just say, okay, match these values. We'll even show you a little bit of how you could capture unexpected values as well. So it really frees you up So your code, especially if you're writing Lambda code, you want it to be as snappy as you can, because like conversations have to be quick, but you also want it to be single, like it's doing one single thing in your function, right? It's giving you a response. It's not doing all this other data cleanup for you as well.
Right. And we sort of touched upon third-party API requirements, but just wanted to touch on how it works in PetMatch. So again, we have our energy slot here, and any one of these natural ways how to speak, say high energy, you know, you can say go hiking, run with, that'll be high. If you just say like to watch Amazon video with, that's low energy, right? So you don't have to, in your code, have a map from your synonyms to the values that you're going to pass to your APIs.
Yeah. And like someone could say something completely off the wall on there, like every time I'm trying to leave the house and I forgot something, I ask my dogs where they put my keys or my wallet, and they never answer. So I want a dog that'll find my keys.
Yes.
But it's, in this case, we built the API, right? So we could have made it like a billion different ways to just make it match what we wanted. In the real world, like even if you're building something from the ground up, you're probably going to have a developer working on the API or a development team working on the API full time and just doing like collecting their own requirements, and they might be servicing multiple teams and all this. So you're not going to be able to say like, oh, can you please add place tug of war to your, they're going to say no, or they're going to have a certain design that you're going to have to adhere to. Another real use case is you're using someone else's API. You're paying them. There's no control. Like millions of people are using this API. It is what it is, man. Like unless someone else, unless they release a new version that's going to be driven by their product. So you want to be able to normalize data. I think we kind of mentioned that briefly before, but be able to take whatever the user says, turn it into the value that the API wants, and just run with that.
So now let's go back and revisit what happens when we have multiple matches. So in this case, we have little, right? So it's mapped to both tiny and small. So the user actually said little. So here's a snippet of our JSON. And you can see here the value was little. And we still get our ER success match. But in this case, in our values array, we have two values. We have tiny and small. And so what we can do here is we can check the size. And then in the code, we can come back and say, which would you like? Or there are small dogs and tiny dogs. Which would you like?
Yeah, and then you can have like a little tiny piece of code that is, oh, if I get ER success match, but then the array of values is greater than 1, it means like I've got multiple possibilities there, and I have to send back some sort of response for the user to give me more information for that value. But you're on your way, right? Like, oh, user, you said little. Do you mean like, do you want to have a really tiny dog? A small dog is fine. And then you can have that come back from the user, maybe get an additional word and kind of roll from there.
So in this next step, what we can do is we can actually validate our slots. So we can say, Alexa, ask PetMatch for a dragon.
I'm sorry, I can't match you with dragons.
So it just like what we did there is just almost as an Easter egg, we added mythical creatures, the concept of a mythical creature that this code could pair you with. But what it's doing is, as soon as we get that validation for that intent or for that slot, we don't even make an API call. Like we don't have an API call for mythical creatures. We just have some canned responses. And excuse me, the mythical creature could be anything. And we're just grabbing that value that the user said and just parroting it back. And it looks like your skill is way more complex than it is because it can just handle any input.
So in this case, what we're doing is if the user says dragon, we get our ER success match, and we've created the slot value called mythical creatures, and we filled it with dragon, unicorns, whatever, and we have a set of random responses. So every time that the user says, I want a dragon, or basically anytime they say something that resolves to a mythical creature, we're randomly choosing a response. And so that also adds further Easter eggs and adds character to your experience, because the users will be able to want to experiment and say like, oh, what other things can I say? And what other things it's going to say back to me? Yeah,
and like there's like little things you can do around that where when you're building an advanced skill, one of the first things you want to do is decouple your content from your code, right? In our very basic skill templates, like fact or whatnot, all the strings were there in the same file. But what's happening there is like if you're working with a marketing team or even yourself, there's this friction where you could tell them like just modify this text file, but if they leave a trailing comma or they use a tilde instead of a single apostrophe, now your code's broken. Now all your users are angry. You don't want to do that. So you want to decouple those, and that's where like the API that we build kind of comes in handy. But you could also do it just with another .js file or a .json file that's just a data structure, and then it's separate from it. You start getting some distance. Eventually, you could just like have it hosted on S3 or do something completely different. But you can start adding that variety. Right. So when I come in and it says like hello pet match or whatever, it could say like, oh, good morning. It's Friday, like it's almost a weekend, or something different on Mondays. Like just kind of start tweaking those around, and instead of having hard-coded canned values, maybe just make them an array. You can start there, right? Make them an array and then randomly grab something from there. And if you want to look at stuff like that, we have cookbook items on our cookbook on GitHub, where we do little snippets like this that do that specific functionality.
Right. So now what happens if the user says something that doesn't match, something that we don't want it, right? So for our size slot, what if the user says pizza? Like I want a pizza dog. So in that case, we get a ER success no match. So that means that the value, like due to fuzzy matching, it found a value, but it fell outside of the list that we provided. So that's the one thing that you want to realize, is that it's not an enumeration.
Yeah, and that's a very, very important concept to wrap your brain around. And obviously, as advanced skill builders, you've dealt with this. Like you're working with training data. It's not really enumerations. It's not arrays. And it's a model that's getting built based on the training data that you provide for your utterances, for your slots, for your entity resolutions. But in this case, what I like, the first time I looked at it, I was like, what? ER code, success, no match. So how is it a success but no match?
Right.
And what it really means is that ER like said there's a value here, like there's a word, so pizza's there. And then no match was it's not part of my list. Right. But you're still getting a word. So there's multiple routes you can go, like, oh, there's straight up no word. The user just said and that's like that wouldn't be an ER success, right? Right. Or they said pizza. But then what you can do here, and you can go down a very deep rabbit hole here, but just bear with me for a second. You could have a code that if you do ER success no match, just start dumping the actual value that's associated with those ER success no match and look at them and just say, hey, what are the users saying? And what didn't I account for? And are there things here that I should be adding? Right.
So for example, we have itty bitty, right? Yeah. That could be a size. That's a valid value, but we don't have that mapped in our synonyms. So if we're logging it, we can capture that and then come back and add that later.
Yeah. So you can start adding these additional values. You can use ER in this kind of different way to start educating you about what else can I be adding? What other values should I be capturing? What is happening a lot? I know sometimes in like certain noisy environments, certain words might sound like other words. So someone was telling me about ready versus Freddy, and they started seeing that a bunch of their users were saying Freddy over and over and getting an unexpected behavior when they wanted them to say ready. So what they did is they added Freddy as a synonym to their ready state, and it just started working really well for everybody. Like they stopped seeing any issues around that. But they had to do some digging, and they had to really get familiar with how all of their users were using it. And at that point, they'd done beta testing, and their skill was live and everything. And they hadn't seen that until they kind of got a little bit deeper.
Right. So now we're going to talk about memory, in particular persistence, and how we're persisting data through PetMatch. And so through the conversation, we're persisting what's being said between the user and capturing the slots, and then we're able to capture the results of the match. So we've seen this slide earlier, but this is basically just the interaction between the skill, the Lambda function, and the API.
Yeah, and typically what you want to do is like add that extra layer of persistence. Like that's the real memory. You like the base level of it is session attributes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every object that goes through the Alexa voice service is tagged with a session number. As long as that session number doesn't change, the voice service is going to maintain an object in there that's the session attributes.
Right.
And those session attributes are our way of using a serverless technology like Lambda in mimicking a state.
Right. It's kind of like short-term memory.
Yeah, exactly. But as soon as a session number changes, they're gone.
Yeah.
They're not persisted anywhere. They just disappear. They're in the ether. And you don't want to do that, right? Like if I ask you a bunch of questions about your dog and you're like 3 interactions in, and then you have to go because you're busy. And then you come back and you're like, I don't know who you are. Let's start from the top. It's going to be a bad experience.
Right.
What you really want to do is be able to pick it up where you left it, or you want it to later say, hey, you've gone through this pet match thing 5 times, and the 5 times I matched you with a Chihuahua. So maybe here's an email about a rescue place for Chihuahuas, right?
Right. Right. So you can take that proactive approach.
Correct.
And so one of the ways to persist that data is to use something like DynamoDB. And DynamoDB is built into the SDK. And so you don't even have to create the table yourself. Like it will create it in code. Like it'll try to connect to the database. And if it's missing, it will spin it up for you and then start saving it when you write to it.
Yeah, and like quick kind of segue here is like you'll need the right IAM profile or role to be able to access Dynamo associated to your Lambda function. In general, when you can, take the least permissive IAM approach. So pro tip, get off that root account. You don't want to be on that root account. Right. And what I mean by that root account is the email and password only account that is associated to your AWS IAM profile. You want to create another one that is you, but is less permissive, right. Or another one, even if it has every permission, something that you can quickly nuke. Because I've heard all the horror stories about people inadvertently sharing their AWS credentials on the internet and then racking up crazy bills. Yeah. And then they have to go home and like do something, call customer support to stop it. If you at least create that separate account, you can say, oh no, something went wrong, go in on root and revoke their privileges, right. Or just change their password. And then whoever stole it, you're good, right? Right,
because if your root count is hosed, then
yeah, if your root count is compromised, it's going to take a lot of work to get out of that. And if you have that extra layer, same thing for Dynamo, right? Or for Lambda. If you're using Dynamo, but you're only reading and writing to it, don't give it the ability to delete the table. Don't let yourself make that mistake. Right. Or if you work at a big company, like a big company like Amazon, when we hire someone, a new SDE or an intern, we're not like, here's the keys to the castle, see you, we're going to go to lunch. And then you come back and you're like, I was playing around with this new service and I deleted all the credit card information for our users. That would be a very big deal. So they get a role that has a bunch of profiles associated to them that they will only do what we want that intern to work on.
Right. And so we just wanted to point out some of the useful resources. And if you use these resources together, you can build a compelling skill and learn how to monetize and receive rewards for building a compelling skill experience.
Yeah, the first one is great, is the Alexa Design Guide. That's a living document that a bunch of different teams at Amazon collaborate on, including our team. Mm-hmm. But we have people like Philip Hunter and all these different people that have worked on voice UIs for years and years and years. Like it might sound like a new thing because I was presenting at a conference not too long ago, and people were asking me like, "Oh, when do you think like the first college graduates that are designers for this will come out?" And I was like, "They already exist. They're out there. They have 30 years experience because they've been working on multiple systems, IVRs, and all these different things. But they exist. So we have a few of them. We're fortunate enough to have a few of them in the company, and we're trying to take their knowledge and put it on the design guide, paired with like some code that we're creating. Another good one is the AWS credits, right? Yes. So that's really cool. $100 a month in AWS credits for anyone that has a published skill. And to me, really the cool part about that is that I'm always seeing all awesome new services come from my AWS,
Yes.
and I want to go play around with them. But there's the other side where I don't want to be poor.
Right.
So I'm always hesitant. I don't know how much it's going to cost.
Right.
But if I have $100 a month, I at least have that sense of security that if I rack up a crazy like $20 bill in an hour, I'm like, oop, I'm not gonna do that anymore. But it's not costing me anything. And
right.
it's something that it was like our first constant reward thing that we started doing for developers along the side with our perks, right? Yeah. Where if you build X number of skills in a month, you would get socks or T-shirts or sweatshirts or all these different things. That continues, and you can find that also online if you search for Alexa perks. The other two resources are the Alexa office hours. So our team hosts those every week.
Every Tuesday.
Yeah, and we rotate our team in and out. So if you don't like me and Justin, you can wait for a Paul day or a Jeff day or a Cami day, and maybe you get a different perspective. What we're trying to do is share as much of the knowledge that's within the team with the community, but also hear as much as we can from you. We, in effect, are the voice of the community inside the company, right? So we try to take all that feedback from you and put it where the product team can find it. There's also it's brand new, and we didn't put a link on here, but Alexa.uservoice.com is a good place for you to put your own feature requests, and those can get upvoted and downvoted. So that's great. And the last one is
the dev rewards.
Yeah, the dev rewards, and those are super, super cool. That is
every month.
Yeah, a program where every month we pay developers based on the engagement of their skills. So the most engaging skills get a payout in 7 different categories, and that's really cool. But like we said at the top of the hour, that's no longer the only way to make money.
Right.
We just announced monetization, and just kind of to hit on that again, we're going to have Amazon Pay integration, one-time purchases, and subscriptions. So we definitely invite you to check that out. There's a blog post out for it. It's in developer preview right now, but we're looking to go wide with it next year.
Cool. And
what we're going to do is Martha will do the last of the housekeeping for us. We're going to say bye for now, but we're going to jump over to twitch.tv, and we're actually going to take Pet Match, and we're going to start hacking around with it for the next hour. So we should be online on there in the next couple of minutes, and we'll see you there for sure. If you want to follow us, if you're wondering who these two people are on the screen, this is Justin Jeffers, and I'm Memo Dorian. We're both solutions architects on the voice design education team.
Yes, follow us on Twitter.
Great. Thank you, Memo and Justin. That was great. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. Before we close, I just want to remind you that once you leave, you will receive a survey on the presentation. Please take just 30 seconds to send us your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email in the next day or two with a link to the recording of today's webinar. Thank you. And as Memo and Justin mentioned, you can join us over on Twitch for a bonus hour at twitch.tv/Amazon Alexa. Twitch.tv/Amazon Alexa. Thank you so much.